So, welcome everybody. Now, I'm here to introduce our keynote speaker, Wilson Syfe. I just want to say a few words first about today and about Wilson. I've asked Wilson to address the seminar this morning because there's more than one reason Australia needs a Glass-Steagall separation of banks. Right? There's a very obvious one: protect us from a crisis, protect our deposits in a crisis. You know, it's the opposite approach to bail-in, right, which is we've just launched the petition about, so we can escalate on that issue post the election. But there's a more fundamental reason, which is the very functioning of our economy. And in the last 18 months, thanks to Wilson Syfe for stepping forward and assisting us in our campaign, he's become a very important collaborator of the CEC. He brings a unique perspective as someone who's worked in investment banking and in the regulators to this cause of reforming the banking system. And what's happened is, as Wilson has accompanied me to Canberra to speak to members of Parliament, you get to, in these discussions, you get to see the assumptions that they have and how those assumptions shape the way they think about something like Glass-Steagall, including often the denial they have that Glass-Steagall is necessary. So what I've noticed in our trips together is Wilson has become more and more stimulated by these experiences to want to get what he knows out through various papers he's written, etc. So because he can tell, he has done his own research and he can tell why the assumptions of these politicians that we're talking to are wrong, right? And as a result, Wilson has done a lot of incredible work, very productive work over the last 18 months in multiple papers, etc. And the last time we were in Canberra, he was showing me the original research he's been doing on Australia's economic data, where he's not all of us data analysts. It can be a rather boring job, but thank goodness for people like Wilson who have the mathematical skills to do it. So he's looked at it, and what I was struck by when he was giving me these, just a bit of a flavour of what he's found, is these are the things that the CEC for 30 years has been concerned about. But here's Wilson coming at it from a completely independent, objective standpoint, arriving at much the same conclusions about the data. And what Wilson will prove today is, I won't steal this thunder too much, is that when you have an election like we've just had, and our Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, is saying, how good is Australia? And the assumption is, how good is the Australian economy? Right? It's not. But we can say that. I'm about to let Wilson prove it. So now, because of Wilson and I strategised about this morning, because certain things he's going to go through, he wants, what we would normally do is I would give a briefing to you all to start the proceedings about what's happening in Australia and the world in terms of the major issues we're concerned about, such as the state of the financial system, such as the state of international relations and the danger of things spiralling out of control. I'm going to do that next, because Wilson's going to say a few things that's going to help set the stage for what I say. So we're going to do Wilson in two parts. He's going to give the first part of his presentation now. I will then speak and give you a briefing that complements what he's done, and then we'll have a break, and then Wilson will do the second part of his presentation before lunch, and then we'll have lunch. Wilson has a lot of charts, illustrations, so that's the other good reason he's going first, because you need your brain switched on, right? This is, what Wilson will go through is a pretty thorough proof about the state of the economy, right? And what you will find valuable as activists is that knowledge that you can then, once you see it presented in this way, and we're videotaping this so we can go on YouTube, etc., this knowledge can help you get out there and spread the word of why stopping bail-in and getting Glass-Steagall enacted is so important, right? So put your thinking caps on, concentrate as much as possible. Breaking the presentation up into two parts will help. But let's learn as much as we can now and then put it to use. So with that said, let me hand over to my very good friend and collaborator, Dr. Wilson Syed.
Well, I must say that I'm honoured to be associated with the CEC because over the last 18 months that I've been associated with CEC, I feel that you are making a lot of progress in terms of getting the message out there. And even at the beginning of the period, we found that the politicians were reacting in one way, and over time they start to shift. So I think it's all due to the important stimulus that Robbie has put forward, and also galvanizing everyone to participate in this movement. And so I congratulate your achievements. My today's talk is just titled The Economy of the Lucky Country. Now we all say that Australia is the lucky country. So the first part of my talk will be about how lucky, in what respect, at least economically, is Australia the lucky country. And after the first part, Robbie will talk about some of the issues I raised in the first part, and afterwards, after morning tea, I'll come back and talk about more deeper aspects of the economy. In other words, there's been some quite serious structural changes in the last 30 or 40 years, as you may all feel or experience as well. Now, my approach is different from a lot of other people's approach, in that I don't start off with any ideology or economic theory. As a scientist, I believe every theory you have is potentially wrong, and you have to constantly match it with observation and change your ideas when facts are confronting your theory. So my passion now is to actually try to discover the economic truth scientifically. That is, looking at the facts and the data. And the first quotes that I have is that it's come from one of the early books by Sherlock Holmes. And Sherlock Holmes was asked by Dr. Watson, he said, what is your theory about this particular sort of murder case, obviously? And Sherlock Holmes said, I have no data yet. It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has data. Insensibly, one begins to twist facts to suit the theory instead of theories to suit facts. So this is my approach, right? I follow Sherlock Holmes. And the important thing is starting with data, and more importantly, which a lot of people do not do, a lot of people present data in their opinion, but the opinion doesn't follow from the data, right? It's a typical trick of a lot of government reports. I mean, having read so many reports now, I've sort of realized that they present the data and then they draw the conclusions. The recommendations. The most recent one you've seen was the Royal Commission. Now, everything the Royal Commission finding has pointed to a lot of things wrong with the system, right? But the recommendation just says, look, we just need to do what we've been doing, just a bit more of it, right? And so the important thing is to analyze start from the data and then analyze what follows from it. So the question is, how lucky is the country? Well, Australia is a lucky country run by second-rate people who shares its luck. This is the full quote from the term lucky country from Donald Horne. It lives on other people's ideas, and although its ordinary people are adaptable, most of its leaders in all fields so lack curiosity about the events that surround them that they are often taken by surprise. So you've seen the surprise from the GFC. You know, the governor of the Reserve Bank said, no one saw it coming. Right? So what I'm going to talk about, what is the economic luck? What is the luck? What are the risks to this luck at some stage? What could happen? What are the second-rate responses? Now, this chart is a chart that claims that Australia has great economic management. And if you look at here, now this is a chart of economic growth, right? So you can see earlier there's been dips. Any dips along the line are recessions, okay? Since the December 1991, right, which is at that stage, it was the last recession, December 1991. We have not had a recession for 27 and a half years. So the claim is that this is a great economic management. The next chart just draws the point at which we had the GFC. So during the global financial crisis, indicated by vertical line, Australia did not enter the recession, right? So there lies the claim. Euro money that year or year after named Wayne Swan the world's best treasurer, and everyone in the government, the regulators, APRA, RBA, the Australian Treasury, they all claim credit, of course, including Ken Henry, you know, his famous dictum, go hard, go early, go to households. So that was the claim that saved Australia. Wayne Swan oversaw the cash handout in 2008 and all these various programs, and that was how the public perceived was the way that we were saved from a recession. And moreover, a lot of people say, well, what about the mining boom? Wayne Swan says, well, it's got nothing to do with the mining boom. You know, it was just their good management. But from all my studies, that sort of economic stimulus did not really ever work from the analysis. So what did happen? Well, here's the next chart. What happened was that the blue line here is net export by China alone. In other words, export minus import. Whenever export is greater than import, the income of the country goes up, right? So that is a positive for GDP, economic growth. The European countries and Japan and so on, the OECD countries, are the red line. And they subtract from economic growth because Australia imports, you know, Japanese cars, import American machineries. A lot of stuff are imported that Australians consume. And I will explain later why that is the case. Now, if you look, well, that is the number of dollars. So the next chart just simply shows you in terms of GDP. So China, for example, in the last 10 years, has added 2% to the GDP. Now, you know that recently we announced that the GDP was about 1.5%. So you can see the impact of export to China, which is enormous. Now, whilst it's true, if you look very closely at here, in 2008, 2009, that growth has not occurred yet. I mean, this large, it was just taking off according to the data. But that is a little bit misleading, because this data that you see is the result of something that's happened already over time. In other words, you've got to go and build your mine, dig out the stuff, transfer it overseas, get your money, right, before that registers in data. So things have already happened before then. And to prove it, I look at the Australian Resources Index. Now the red line is the start of the Rudd government, right? And you can see that the Resources Index has a huge run up already before Kevin Rudd got in, right? And in fact, by the time the GFC occurred, people were getting nervous, and the market always looked, the financial market always tried to look ahead, right? So they were nervous that China may not, proceed with the orders and things like that. So we had a little bit of a crash, right? But as soon as the signal, the coast is clear, everything went up, right? But on the other hand, you could say, well, even in the data, why did Australia not go into a recession then? Well, so this is the part that I show already over here, right? That instead of, there was a trend going down, right? Okay, but somehow it stayed up. You see the trend that economic growth is trending down over the few decades, but it didn't go down. So what's the reason? Well, if you look at the next chart, that is Australian population growth chart. On the bottom is the natural rate of growth due to natural increases, births minus deaths, the green line. The red line is net immigration. So you can see that in 2007, right, this is well before the GFC, there was already a huge run-up in immigration. And at the height of it, which is sort of about in 2009, it reached, Australian population was at that stage at the peak, 500,000 a year at the peak rate. So it's a huge increase. So what happened was that the population growth saved Australia at that time, and then later on, it was the China mineral boom that took over. So in terms of this chart gives you the rate, the impact of population on GDP. So at the peak, the impact of immigration on GDP was 2.2% at the peak. So it just come at the right time to save Australia, the growth in immigration. And the 2007 was the change in legislation under Kevin Andrew. The Citizenship and Immigration Act was relaxed in some way, and so that was why there was a surge in immigration. So that adds to it. And if you took out, right, this is an analysis chart here, the next one. The green line is what actually happened, okay? So the green line is what the data was, right? Okay? But if you took out, the red line is that if you took out immigration, right, and left everything else, is a red line. So the growth is lower, as you expect. And the blue line is that if you took out the export to China as well, the net export effect, Australia would have been in recession for a lot of the time in the last 10 years. So you take out those two factors, because you can see that the growth would have been below the zero line for quite a few years. So let me see what the...
You're right.
Now this is just the next chart is just it's a bit busy, but it just tells you how important trade is, international trade is to Australia. Firstly, this is import and export. So the green is import and the red is export. So whenever the line is above, you get trade surplus, trade deficits and so on, right? And this chart shows you that most of the time, Australia runs a net trade deficit. In other words, Australia imports more than they export. Now, this chart here tells you the comparison between OECD and China. OECD has always been very high export, right? But also very high import in the bottom chart here. In the case of China, the two lines seems to be parallel in import. But since 2010 to now 9-10, there's been a surge of export. So that explains why there was suddenly a huge net export surplus to China, and that added a lot of growth to the growth data. All right, the next chart just simply say, look, advance Australia lucky. Now, in the next chart, I'll tell you that it is not actually fair, economically speaking, not actually fair, but certainly lucky, right? Now, the song says, they've got, with young and free means that you can have a lot of population growth, right? Golden soil and wealth of toil. Certainly, there's a lot of red dirt that you ship off by shiploads, right? And we get a lot of money, right? So those two factors, right? The song's got it right, you know. It's the first three lines, right? So demographic. I'll give you the estimate of impact currently. The demographic factors accounts for 0.6 of the GDP, and the golden soils account for 2% of the GDP. So you can see, and net migration is 1%. So the fat of the land gives 3.6% of economic growth, right? So the fact that it's not 3.6 at the moment means that the rest of the economy is going backwards. Right? Everything else must be going backwards. So the question is, the thing is that plenty of countries were in the past were in similar situation to Australia. You know, some of the Latin American countries, for example. So you've got to realize also that the population growth itself is a Ponzi scheme, because what happens is that unless the immigrants are productive, you're adding more people for the same resources, for the same thing. So you could actually go backwards in terms of your standard of living, right? And unfortunately, that's what happened, right? The resource endowment can potentially hide a lot of the problems. So what we see here in this chart is that the same data again, but what I did was to do a statistical best fit, which is a quadratic spline scale, right? But what it does is shows you the curvature as well. So not just a trend line, but a curvature. So it's going down and it's going down faster. So the rate of growth of the standard of living or the productivity is slowing. The improvement in standard of living is slower, and just to show you that this is confirmed by other people's research as well. I do my research and then I see what other people are saying, and this is a recent chart about Australia per capita GDP, which is productivity, which is standard of living, and they were pointing out that there's been 2 quarters of negative growth in income per capita in Australia. So they were worried that this is a definition of productivity recession. The standard definition is 2 quarters in Australia, 2 quarters of negative growth. So standard of living has been falling for 2 quarters. Now, so the next chart just shows you it's the productivity. Now instead of the just GDP, it's GDP per capita. So without China, the Australian economy would have been going backwards for the last 10 years or so. Now the next thing is the final claim. What is the claim is that the government budget deficit, all this government stimulus that save Australia, right? So you can see this chart comes from the Treasury budget data for Australian Treasury. Now the up and down curve, right? Whenever the red line refers to the right axis, so it's the government budget deficit as a percentage of GDP. So you can see that since the GFC, it has remained deficit at 2 or 3%, and at the worst is more than 4% of budget deficit. Right? In terms of dollars, the green lines is at dollars, right? So it's about 30, 40 billion dollars per year. So you can see now the different dots are just the red dot is the Hawke Keating government. The blue line is the next the Howard government, and then the red line is the Rudd Gillard government, and this is the Abbott, Turnbull, and Morrison, right? So those are the different political party governments. But you can see in this period, if budget deficits generate economic growth, we would have been, having a boom because we had, the China impact and the immigration impact. If you added the deficit, it would have, should have been a huge economic boom, but it didn't happen, right? It was still very lackluster. Well, the thing is, with immigration, there are side effects, right? They were forced to slow down, mainly because of all these traffic jams in Sydney, right? Because there was a lack of infrastructure and water and electricity are not really keeping up with the demand, and also with too many immigrants, there's a lot of racial tension. We've seen problems with all these riots in Cronulla and so on. So it's not immigration is not the answer as such. I'm not against immigration, but you got to plan accordingly. You know what I mean? So this chart tells you that immigration itself can't save you in terms of the economy, because if you look at this chart here, I was saying immigration cannot save you from the housing bubble. Right? We're having the housing bubble. Prices are falling. Well, with more people demand more houses, save us from falling house prices. Well, this chart tells you no. The answer is no, because the green line's immigration. Immigration always goes up quite smoothly, whereas house prices are relatively volatile, right? So you may have you can see the wobbles. The house price actually is quite much more volatile than immigration. So it tends to suggest that immigration can't solve your problem on housing bubble, housing crash. Now, so the other risk to the lucky country is the risks about China. You can see that there's a lot of historically there's been resentment against foreigners for a start, and then particularly the Chinese in the Goldfields, and then the Australian alignment with United States and in the ANZUS Treaty, and America is quite anti-Chinese, as you know, and the fear of Chinese communist state investment in Australia, and recent strategic concern by the military is worry about, Huawei, and you can see in the news. And then, of course, US trade war and shooting war that could occur anytime, I think. So active effort to limit Chinese influence in Pacific. And lastly, China itself may be having an economic slowdown due to overstimulus. So those are the risks to some of the major factors that help Australia, and I think it's probably the right place to stop. So let me just try to conclude. So will the luck last? Well, the major risk is China, because the relationship between China is a little bit rocky, potentially, at the moment. And then immigration has a problem of diminishing return, because even though immigration adds to GDP in the short term, it creates problems in the long term, because there needs to be appropriate infrastructure spending, water, and so on, utilities. So those are the risks, and I think the conclusion is the Australian economic growth since the GFC has bucked a trend of long-term decline. There's actually a long-term decline in the Australian economy. The luck is the spurt of immigration at the right time, and subsequently the China credit and mining boom. I think I've only got left about 10 minutes for questions.
That's all right.
Comments and questions. Yep. Oh,
You're up. You've got to get up for that.
Here you go, Richard. Use this, please.
Doctor, I've always had a... hold it a bit closer. It's not an ice cream. I know. Practice on ice cream. Sugar or flavour. I've always struggled with growth, the word growth, because growth is also a cancer. And the question I ask all learned economists is that does growth take in speculative trading, like share market, derivative trades, and such like products that are really not doing us a lot of good?
Well, the answer is that the financial market tends to deal more with the balance sheet or the wealth aspect. It's sort of like looking at your accumulated wealth, right? Whereas the GDP, it's about current activity or the activity in the last period, right? And the activity is measured by people's income, if you like, mostly consumption and investment, how much you spend in terms of consumption, how much you spend in terms of building new factories and so on, right? So the GDP actually measures the real things. So that's why you can't just make it grow just like that, right? So more or less real things. Although the financial sector growth is due to more people entering into the financial sector. It's their wages, the income's growing. That's what's measured, but not the actual, money or investment that's been measured. That is measured separately on the balance sheet, which I will talk about too. It's called, net total assets and liabilities. these measurements comes into trillions because you accumulate over time. So like for example, with the current account deficit of 2%, about 2% per year, accumulated over 30 or 40 years, it comes to trillions, right? So that's why when you run a deficit, in other words, when you spend more than you earn, the amount of debt grows over time is enormous because even 2% per year accumulated over 40 years, come to 80 or 100% of your GDP. Yeah. And also, there's also compounding.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sy. As I look around here, I see some older people like myself, and we lived through decades when Australia had a strong manufacturing industry and a strong agricultural sector, which were seen as kind of foundations for the economy. Our manufacturing as a percentage of GDP has just continued to go down, 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 and our agriculture has weakened, I think, through lack of foresight and good government policies and so on. So my question is, do you think we can have a strong economic future without strong manufacturing and strong agriculture? And if so, where does the industries for Australia come from? Private sector growth. Where are we going to get growth in the real economy in this country?
Well, firstly, I agree with your observations, and in fact, I'm going to show you the data for that in part 2. So the short answer is, in terms of whether that's a good thing, in terms of it's absolutely is no. I think the Australian economy has become very badly unbalanced for the very fact that the goods sector, which I will show you in part 2, has been decimated, and it is because it's much easier to earn export if you want import to other people's goods, is to be able to export goods yourself, right? So that creates the balance. Whereas if most of your economy is a service economy, right, it's much harder to export service, right? Even though they say, look, education, for example, bringing students to earn foreign income, it's still only very small because it's hard to accommodate a large enough number of students and all this sort of thing to earn education export. So that's why, whereas you shift tons and tons of red dirt, it's easy. So yeah, I mean, you will see in part 2, I'll show you the data. It confirms what you say, that the manufacturing industry has been decimated, and that creates a lot of risk to this economy because it means that you need to import everything you consume in terms of gadgets, cars you import from Japan, washing machines from somewhere else, and machinery for even agriculture from America, and what do we do to pay for all these things?
Dr. Sy, that was the way you presented those charts was absolutely masterful because it was just a step-by-step walk into reality. And my question is, did you have to create those charts yourself, or are they readily available to Treasury? Would they be looking at what you presented and saying?
Those charts that I have are data analysis. In other words, it's raw data. You have to process it, right? You have to do some calculation.
Yeah, so your calculation is in there.
Yeah.
Okay, so they can just ignore those calculations and pretend that everything's sweet.
Correct.
When you do the analysis,
I mean,
you produce those.
if you can present data and you can't understand, you only see, when you just present the raw data, you can just see what it is, going up or down, that's it. But you need to relate that data to other data, to actually understand what is the meaning of it, what is significance, right? So like for example, the chart that I show you about, like the deficit, I do a calculation relative to GDP. So how much deficit it is. If I told you it's $30 billion, it's hard for you to grasp, is it large or small, is $30 billion a year a lot or not a lot?
Can I just ask one further question then? Does this mean that the government actually doesn't know what you've got there? That Kevin Rudd may not have known the reality that you've got there?
Correct.
So when he says we're doing well, he believes it.
Yeah.
He's not lying.
Yeah.
He just doesn't know.
That's right. That's right.
And is there anyone in Treasury who would do what you've done and say, Prime Minister, this is the underlying reality? Is there anyone there who could actually do what you have done there?
Well, they could do.
But they don't.
But they don't. Yeah, I mean, I was working in APRA. I was doing similar sort of stuff on regulation, on superannuation, on the banks and so on, and well, they just don't really want to know.
So the government, the guys aren't actually lying right straight up. They don't know. They're not provided with that accuracy.
Yeah, most politicians don't do any analysis for a start, right? Obvious that it requires a lot of effort, right? You've got to pay someone maybe to do this analysis, and then what they do is they just ask. Whenever they want to know something about the economy, typically a politician will write a memo to the Treasury. Can you give us some data on this, or and the Treasury will package up some information and give to the politician, and Wayne Swan, I think, probably honestly think that, he was responsible for this, for the Saving Australia, right? Because after all, he was given a prize, an international prize, so.
You think so too? And bullshit apples, brain.
Thank you, Doctor. My question is, one of the graphs you showed that the standards of living in Australia has gone up and it's gone down into the negative. I don't know that graph of the standards of living.
Well, had it not been for those factors, it would have gone backwards, right? But even with those factors as they occur, right, the trend of sort of increasing standard of living is moderating. It's growing. The standard of living is growing slower and slower. It's going slower and slower. And I will show you a chart that data is misleading in a way, right? Misleading in the sense that it's the average of everybody, right? It's the total income divided by total population, right? But if you look at the distribution, in other words, if you look at how much the top 1% get and how much the bottom 90% get, you get an even more pessimistic picture, because the top 1% takes in a lot of the income. So I will show you that in part 2 as well, that the economy has created more income inequality, right? So the top 1% are doing very well. The income is increasing much faster every year, whereas the lower part of the population is increasing much more slowly, And so my data that I'm going to talk about shows you that 90%, but you may want to look at the bottom 50% or the bottom 20%. It will be even worse. So there's a lot of Australians. That's what I mean by, Australia not being fair. It's lucky, but not fair. Right? The distribution has not been, I think, conducive to a harmonious system. Yeah.
Thank you, Wilson.